Mr. Raskin, you're recognized for 5 minutes. You're muted.
Ms. Butler, I'd like to come to you, if I might. But I heard one of our colleagues say somebody wins and somebody loses in every election. I wish they would tell that to Donald Trump. America would be a lot better off if he accepted that. But we seem to have two rival theories about what's going on in Georgia today. The way I see it is every time that there's been an advance in people's voting rights in American history, there's been a backlash against it. So after the Civil War, fought to free hundreds of thousands of enslaved people and to give them the right to vote and to bring them up in the Reconstruction process, there was a reaction against that, and we saw all kinds of voting restrictions. Some of it was just violence and terror, but some of it was grandfather clauses, literacy tests, poll taxes, character tests, and so on. And these laws were instituted in order to secure the purity of the ballot, which essentially meant keeping Black people from voting. And we've seen these constant efforts to undermine voting rights of African Americans in our history. And it seems pretty clear to me that what's going on in Georgia is all about the fact that Georgia just elected its first African American senator in history, Senator Warnock, that Joe Biden was the first Democratic candidate to win there in decades. That's certainly what is going on if you ask anybody on the ground in Georgia. And yet there's this rival theory out there, which is it's really about fraud, corruption, chaos, back to that old cover story for racism. And I'm wondering if you can help us sort this out, because I don't live in Georgia and I haven't been there in a long time, but I do know there were 62 lawsuits brought by Donald Trump and his supporters alleging corruption, fraud, and chaos in the 2020 election, and they were all rejected in the lowest courts in the land, circuit courts and district courts in the state level and the county courts, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. They all rejected exactly the kind of stuff we're hearing today about how there's some impurity of the ballot, some assault on the integrity of the ballot. And then I hear people actually accusing, if I'm understanding them right, the civil rights forces of racism because they are opposing efforts to restrict the ballot. So would you help us sort this out? I mean, is my sense right that this is just the conventional racist backlash against Black people voting, or is there some fraud out there that no court in the land could find that's been completely rejected? I think that even Attorney General Barr described Donald Trump's claims about voter fraud as BS. And I'm being polite there. I'm not spelling it out. So let me turn it over to you, Ms. Butler.
Thank you. No, there hasn't been any fraud in Georgia. We had 3 hand counts of the ballots in Georgia. That means all 159 counties did an audit, and they did 2 recounts, hand recounts, not using equipment, but they did hand counting. We had the GBI and the FBI look at our signature match process. It was found competent. There was nothing that they found wrong with it. There was no fraud. We had an exceeding number of people turn out to vote because in this pandemic with COVID, they were able to exercise that right to vote, and they did that. And because of that, we now have these egregious laws that will take over local boards of election, take total control. When I'm on the board of election, I was on a board of election. We were responsible for counting the absentee ballots. We were responsible for making sure that the ballots were rejected or accepted. We were responsible for accepting provisional ballots, making sure the proper documentation was received. So with the entire process, to the poll workers being trained, we were responsible.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Smoothest election There was no fraud.
I want to get one other point in here. I know that during the election, or right after it was over, former President Trump called the then Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who's a Republican, and said, just find me 11,781 votes. He was trying to encourage him to commit election fraud, voter fraud. Is there anything in the legislation that the Republicans are passing that would stop Donald Trump from trying to implant false votes in Georgia? Responded to that at all?
The witness will answer very briefly because the gentleman's time's expired.
No, the law does not address that issue at all. It stops legitimate people from exercising their right to vote.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr.